Today we will talk about Context API. We will talk about how to create a single source of data which can be shared between applications. This is very important because often we have components which are not like in a child-parent relationship. They are siblings or they have no connection to each other and they want to share the same data to use it differently. So in this case, React has Context API. Context API is a series of hooks which can help you share data. The idea behind it is you create a simple component, but this component has a store which you created through createContext, and after that you use provider from createContext to like wrap your application around this store. Of course, when we build it, you'll understand this better. However, for now, just know that we have Context API, which helps us to create components that share data with any component. So we create a single component, we put our data in this component, and that component can share this data with any component that it wants. So we don't need probes or stuff like that anymore. We don't need to send probes down like to 2-3 levels of applications. We just have one component that shares data with all the our app, and that's really great to learn. So hope you learned something in this lecture. By the way, this is the final lecture. After this, we will build an application with React. Let's talk about state management, or just in simpler terms, how to share like props between components that are not related. For example, here in this application we have home. We created last lecture. Home have some data and shares the data posts through props. But we want to show navigation here, like in this app, on app level. And you will find that there are situations where you have something like this, where you can't actually do anything about it because they are not related. Now we have navigation here. Let's, instead of this navigation, write the number of posts. And if we look at our application, we see the number of posts. Here in this component, we are trying to know the number of posts here, like how many posts do we have. There is no easy way to share because these are siblings. It's not like we can put navigation in the post because, well, that's not how we code in React, and you will face situations where it's not that much possible. To solve that, React has something called context or Context API. Now let's create post provider.js. Now this is just a name. You can name it anything, but just create a functional component where you have post provider. This is, up until this moment, this is just a normal component. However, to make it like a context, we import createContext from React, and to create a store, we name it like post context equals to createContext, then call the createContext. Now let's export this one too. Also, let's have no default exports, just normal exports, named exports. Now we have a post context, also this component. The difference between a React component and a React context is, instead of returning a div, we return this context that we created through post context or through createContext. Now here you also say provider dot provider. Now we have this easily like set up, but how like other components know about this post context, post provider? Well, the best thing to do is to just, go to your app and wrap everything around, wrap the provider, wrap everything around the between the provider or something like that. Now every component knows that we have a post provider, and anything that we do in this component, the other components know about it, just because we've created a context through post context, and we return that context provider through this post context or post provider. Now, before anything else, we have to show something like, okay, this wraps the application, but in order to show the application, we have to use the children probe. Anything between this, just show it. So we studied children probe. Now let's say const value equals to hello. Const, let's not name it value, let's name it post equals hello. Then here we can make this a value, like return the values through this. So we have this object, we have this variable, we are sending it to all the application through this. The provider has a value of post. Now we've written this wrong, so let's see if this works. It might not, because honestly I just started working on this. So let's see if our application is still running. Refresh it. It's still running, so we may not have that many problem. Now let's go to navigation. To make this work, we need two things. First, we need the useContext. So useContext. And we need a variable, for example, post equals useContext. Then we give it the context, which is post context, not the provider. The provider only wraps your application. The context is what gives your application access to the variables that we have. See, we want to access this value, so we do it through value.post, and to access it we use useContext, which takes post context. Now let's just see the value of this, and hopefully we have yes, hello. And if we change it, if we change the provider to goodbye, we see it's goodbye. The good thing about this is, if we want to show with each post, we can still do it, like just use context and const, you can name it anything you want, but let's say const farewell. How do you write farewell? I have no idea. Use context and post context. Okay, so it auto imported it. Now let's, after each post, show the farewell and see what do we have. Now we see goodbye everywhere and goodbye here. Now this is very important, because you can name your variable as you like, but when you use the post context of useContext, then you have access to the value of this variable here. Now how do we make it work for our posts? Well, let's go to the place where our posts are shown, like in home. Here we have this const post set post use state, and we can just do this, like copy your provider, copy your call, and replace it here. Now we have two variables here, so we do this value instead of this post is posts set posts. Now let's see, use state and use effect is not defined. Well, we just okay, let's see. Now objects are not valid as a React child. Well, this is because we try to show an object, which we can't. However, in the navigation, as we said, we just try to show how many posts we have, and in JavaScript we have length for arrays, and we see 100 posts. So now we can use this post in any component that we want. For example, if we go to home, and instead of all this like code, since we have a source of code, a store, we say instead of use state, use useContext. Sorry, that was, and post context. So use it from here. Of course, we don't need these. We just need useContext now, and see if this is working still. We see it works. So how easy it was, like, to make our code so much cleaner, like our home, our navigation, they all show the same data.